Koe te arapuru, Sounds.
E ngā reo, e ngā mana, rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. You are with the Moments in Time podcast series for SOUNZ, Centre for New Zealand Music, Toi Te Arapuoro. Talawhalava, I'm Tauiriili Alpha Maiava. Faiumu Matthew Salapu, or better known as Anonymouz with a Z, in the music and creative industry, was commissioned by the Ministry of Pacific Peoples to create Intention, a soundscape to accompany the Ifoga, a ceremonial process seeking of forgiveness in the Samoa or Samoan tradition for the dawn rates at the beginning of the New Zealand government's historic apology at the Auckland Town Hall. Anonymouz has a wide background in the audio creative industries, including composing soundscapes for Black Grace, the premier dance company, many other theatre productions, also for the 50th anniversary of friendship between Samoa and New Zealand in 2012, and for the Festival of Pacific Arts in Guam in 2016. I asked Anonymouz about his involvement with the Dawn Rates Apology ceremony.
I have been commissioned by the Ministry of Pacific Peoples from the minister's team to recreate the moment through sound that the Ifoga process or the forgiveness process that the Dawn Raid Apology event is loosely using as a framework. So, as you said before, I have a wide variety of backgrounds in the audio creative industries, and one of those spaces is, as you mentioned, is as a soundscape artist. I've done soundscapes for Black Grace, who are our premier dance company, for multiple theatre company shows, also for the New Zealand government for the 50th friendship anniversary with Samoa with John Key back in 2012, I believe, at the Guahan Museum, part of the 2016 Festival Pacific of Arts, a soundscape there tracing Inga Bisa, who was part of the first Mau movement who got exiled to Saipan. So, I've got quite a bit of experience in the intersection of soundscape and cultural history and kind of framing a lot of these stories. So I was approached by the ministry to basically create an audio bed or a soundscape that the audience will sit in for a few minutes to kind of take us all back to what the apology is for in the traditional Samoan context, that this event's loosely frameworked around the Ifoga process, which is where the person who has committed the thing that they're asking for forgiveness for, they sit outside the house of the person, of the family they're apologizing to, for as long as it takes while they're covered in a fine mat. And when they are forgiven, when the family deems that they are forgiven, they will come and remove it. If they get forgiven, absolutely. And so obviously, with this event, they're just using that as a framework, for to make it meaningful. And Jacinda was quite clear that she didn't just want it to be words on a paper that were just set out that if she was apologizing to the Pacific peoples who the people at the time had wronged, then obviously we need to kind of, right from the outset of the event, paint a picture, make people feel, okay, what are you apologizing for? What is this? And so that's basically what I've been asked to do, is just use sound to kind of recreate that moment. And I think that was a really smart call on their behalf. We're far too saturated with visual imagery these days, and as we all know, when you detach one of your senses, it alleviates your other ones. So I think that the decision from the ministry to not necessarily start out right by showing us literally, documentary footage, which we've seen the news interviews and everything, but to just make everybody sit and just use our ears, just really sit in the frequency of the moment. And so that's basically how I've come into this.
Working with Anonymouz on creating music for the Ifoga was Hufanga he ako moe lotu, Dr. Okusitino Mahina, a distinguished Tongan academic and retired professor of Tongan philosophy, anthropology, and Aesthetics at the University of Auckland. I asked him about the effect the Dawn raids had on Pacific communities in the 1970s.
I could read the expressions on my brothers' faces, that fear, which is a psychological crisis, emotional, and I mean it's physical, bodily, of being caught as a person. Psychological. It was also psychological, emotional, and also social, cultural, because they were Tongans and they were connected to other kainga and to the whole of Tonga in socially and culturally. So the whole equation, the effects and effects were all of the above. They were affected and affected physically, socially, because they had to hide from being seen. And the pressure, fear is basically psychological and emotional.
Well, it creates an inability to be able to think, do anything, or plan forward.
It was like an atom bomb awaiting to explode.
Without knowing when.
Yeah, when. Yeah, the uncertainty there was to the whole experience was attributed to this living in fear, and of course, fear of not being able to fulfill their social and cultural obligations to tautua, to whaiwhatongia, to keeping the wā here and back in Tonga, you see.
The Ifoga is deeply symbolic and meaningful. I asked Anonymous about the role of this soundscape in the apology ceremony.
I think, like for myself personally, like empathy has to lead. Like we have to immediately empathize with those who were affected by it. Like there will be a lot of slogans and a lot of, very craftily written things about this. But if we put ourselves in the shoes, or actually if you woke up in the morning you weren't wearing shoes, but if we put ourselves in the experience of somebody who just has their morning turned upside down in such a way, because if this apology is for that act, then we need to put ourselves in the, in the mindset of those that the act was done towards. And so that's the basis of the soundscape. It's not, I didn't want to make it Hollywood overblown or put in any orchestras or anything to kind of push it a certain emotive way. But it's literally a depiction of here is what is. Like it sounded like this. And that's a challenge too, because, if we were watching on a Hollywood film, you can have the perspective of the cop and the cameras in the cop car. Then you can go to the room of the family that was in the room, and then you are outside the door doing the knocking, and then you're on the inside of the door hearing the knocking, and it just becomes a very, you've got a lot of things to play with when it's a visual medium. But with the soundscape, you're like, okay, whose perspective are we hearing this from? Like this door knock, do I use the sound of the door knock from the outside, so now I am from the perspective of the officer? Do I muffle it and EQ it out so that it's from the inside? And so forth. And do I have murmurings? And if those murmurings are done, what are they literally saying? Because if people hear literal words in the soundscape, it's going to push it a certain way. So there's a lot of things that I kind of have to really sit back and be quite neutral about. Because what I don't want to do with the soundscape is try to over dramatize it and try to push an agenda with it. Really, it's just recreate what in my mind would have been the moment. Because at the end of the day, I was not in those rooms being Dawn raided. I've seen all the interviews. I've heard what they said it was like. And I can't assume to be in the minds of the policemen and their intent with how they knocked and what they were saying, whether they were racist or not. I could never do that. So really what I'm recreating is not the intent behind what happened, but what happened. Just lay it out. Would have sounded like this. And if you're sitting in the Auckland Town Hall, then you're going back to that moment where you're hearing the perspectives of the officers, of the government, and the people that our Pacific brothers and sisters that this happened to. So it's been more not necessarily producing but reducing, as Kanye would say, but just making sure that the core elements are there, and everything else is it's just icing on the cake. It's detail, but not over dramatizing it and making it something that it doesn't need to be. While I'm building these soundscapes, it's very simple to do it the Hollywood traditional production way, which is just go to some sound libraries or whatever. But if I'm using door knocks or certain sounds, if I have them in my archives, then I'm actually bringing physical places into the town hall. Like there's a part at the end of the soundscape which is where we use water to kind of wash away the it's the forgiveness. Let's whangaloia ngā mea, and I could just use whatever water sounds good, but if I take water from the Pacific that I've recorded that I know signifies this, then I'm taking that time and that place and that intent that I recorded at Falealupo or over in the Guahan waters, and I'm taking that file, that snapshot of that time, place and intent, and I'm bringing it back into the town hall for our Prime Minister to sit under and feel the intent and the depth of the forgiveness that I want us all to feel, and hopefully progress us all onto healing and another better chapter.
I asked Anonymouz how he put the soundscape called Intention together.
It's quite a straightforward piece in terms of the sound design, the soundscaping. Because like I was saying before, I'm really mindful that I don't put too many there's so many tricks and really fancy things I want to do with the sounds and make it do this, make it do that. But the second I do that, I distract from the painting. It's about the. And so the soundscape itself is quite straightforward. It lays out chronologically what would have happened on those mornings. And then it's also, if you can imagine the camera in the place of if you can imagine the microphone in the place of a camera that's swinging from shot to shot. So, we're going to hear, we're out, like a movie, you frame it with the wide shot where it takes place. So, it starts off with, the cicadas and the early bird life. So those are taken from recordings around here. In Aotearoa, and then it'll swing to the unlatching of a gate. So now you are the person on the outside that is encroaching, and then you hear the door knocks, and so the camera keeps swinging around, which is the microphone keeps changing perspective to kind of hear, and then it starts to overlay, because that's one of the most common things that I've seen in the recollections is just this nature of chaos and disbelief. It's the early morning, you're at your most vulnerable, you're not even fully conscious yet, and as you say, that must be horrifying to some, to kind of all of a sudden see these almost intruders and flashlights and dogs frothing at the mouth, and it's chaos. And so, the soundscape devolves into a bit of chaos, and there's a lot of juxtaposition of sounds, and so forth. And then I very consciously decided to juxtaposition it with an old Richard Moyle recording of a traditional farewell song when somebody's about to depart. And it is a recording that was taken of a family back in Samoa, one of these classic recordings. And so as this chaos and negative thing is unraveling, you hear this very smooth hymn underneath it. Which is ironically a hymn of travelling. So here we are as a people who travelled over the oceans, over the waters to come here. We get treated in a certain way, and now we have to travel all the way back over the oceans, back to where we came. And so that song of departure kind of is there symbolically. And then ironically, like I said, that water element is quite a metaphor for the transition. Like there's a moment at which we tip from the indiscretion to forgiveness, and that needed to be quite a big moment in the piece, because sonically we need to indicate to the audience and indicate to Jacinda, this is the moment at which the forgiveness is happening. Like, we've gone from the thing that was wronged to a moment where you're forgiven for it, and water is the metaphor for that. I like how Norma has also, she's given meaning to it too, like in Māori culture, like in, you know, a lot of our indigenous cultures, when you leave a cemetery, you've got to wash your hands to let go of the space. And obviously we can't have physical water in the town hall, so just hearing the sound of water has many references and so forth. But, you know, to me, I put it there so that it can just wash away you know, the negative energy, and usher in the new phase forward, which is where Dr. Mahina, him and his whangu and his granddaughters, that was quite a big transition, because we're essentially moving from digital back into analog. And so I've met with him to kind of hear what they're playing, because the really cool thing about whangu is they're not necessarily tuned exactly to the 440 hertz Western tuning. You know, when they make these instruments, they have a life of its own. They will have a frequency of its own. So over the sound of the water, there's also another tone that plays, and I'm tuning that tone to the key that they're playing in. So I've had them come in, heard their first couple of notes, and I'm just making sure that that chord that holds at the end, which is also made up out of a very special location. There's some very special locations that I've been in which are very, very significant to you know, to our Pacific Indigenous histories, that I'm taking recordings of those places, and I use the software to turn them into sounds, to tones. And so there's a tone that will underpin them playing live. So at that moment, you basically, you know, it's going to be a really beautiful transition of physical spaces used digitally, handing the moment back into the present with Mahina, and it's all in key, it's all in tune.
Tell me why you had to integrate and bring your granddaughters into the whole process to play with you, and what emotions that evoke for you just having the fruit of the reason why we leave home for a better life now, side by side, during the time of the apology.
You said it both very, very well. The bigger picture and the narrower picture, which is the use of the whangu and the sound associated with it, which is golden tonga and the sound of death and the dead, which is associated with the past. So this ancient instrument, which is near extinct, belongs in the past, symbolically. And it evokes and invokes, as you rightly said, the interplay of the past, the present, and the future, where we in Moana Oceania bring the past to the front as guidance, and upon which the future is brought to bear, guided by refined past experiences, where both the past and the future are constantly mediated in the ever-changing present. See how clever the thinking and feeling of our ancestors in mediating the metaphorical and historical dimensions of time and space, notably the past, the present, and the future. And that's one thing why we thought of using this ancient instrument and this ancient inverted comma sound, therefore whaikehe, or which can be approximately translated as the minor sound or minor tune, you see. just to contextualize the dawn rates in a broader musical, artistic, aesthetic context through the medium of sound. This instrument, I believe the same was done in Samoa and in other Mono-Oceania Pacific Islands, you see. This particular instrument was used to put people to sleep and awaken them or wake them up from their sleep. So it's a kind of transformation through sound again, through ongo. You see how beautiful. And this was specifically used for members of the royalty and nobility. You know, run about 10, 11, you know, you have a group of nose flutists or fang players, you know, playing away, giving soothing. It's still soothing effect, you see, putting the monarch or the aripaia to sleep. And then early in the morning, before dawn, you hear the same, by bringing them back from the world of sleeping to the waking world.
Like every other project I get involved in, it's like I've got to assemble the right team of sounds. So once I knew, okay, this is going to need door knocks, sirens. You know, I might get the siren from an Otara Gangster rap album I did 5 years ago. I might get the water from the Guahan Museum exhibition that I did. I might take I just take the elements. I assemble the team of sounds for this mission. And I know that they're not just any sounds, they're sounds from real places, real spaces with real intent, and then I just start to create, and you just start to build the layers. And I have a very hip-hop graph approach to things. You start with the big, very rough sketches. That's just my nature. A lot of beat makers and a lot of people are able to do the detail from the outset. I'm not one of them. I like to just rough sketches, outlines, and then they just start solidifying, and then it becomes shading, fine-tuning, and before you know it, the graph piece is done. So I think that's the hip-hop part of me that's still stuck with me in terms of how I create pieces. So at the moment, I'm in the fine-tuning stage. The main outlines for the soundscapes have been done. I'm actually thinking about activating online social media and asking people, I'm not going to tell them what it's for, but asking people to record door knocks from all around Aotearoa or the world and just send it in, because it'll just take them a minute. It's a collective story.
That's awesome.
It's a collective story. So I've done that in the past with Te Oro, the Te Oro soundscapes that adorn the Cleanliness Music and Arts Centre. I worked with 3 iwi there in the local community for over a year, recording over 400 community groups and then sampling them all into a 3-movement symphony of sound. So I'm thinking for this, like now that I've got all my main bits done, I'm thinking of just asking online, hey, look, if you've got a minute of your time and you're against racism and you want to contribute to a project I can't yet talk about, but this is, then send in, record yourself knocking on the door, send it through, and I'll embed it into the work. So we're all in this together. I don't really have an expectation. There's a hood artist that I used to work with, Milkman. He's an underground legend in Mangele, and one of his lyrics has always stuck with me. It is what it is, and it'll be what it becomes. And, all I can do is just put my best foot intention forward, hand over the file, and people are going to receive it how they receive it. I can't control any of that. I would like to think that it will contribute to a better, more fairer society, that people walk out of there, or people watch the live stream around the world and really go, I could feel the intent. I could feel, and then the world shifts a certain way. So I really pray that the way all of us involved in this project, there's so many amazing people involved with it, and there's so much bureaucracy too. That's just the nature of the beast. And so it's a complex thing to navigate, so many moving pieces, so many people with their intent, so many layers of complexity. But at the end of the day, good is good, bad is bad. And, somebody at the end of the day operating this just presses play, and people will receive it how they will receive it.
So the Ifoga was a real touching way of starting the ceremony. Historically in our culture, when you do a wrong back home, that's one way of presenting yourself to the family you have wronged and seek forgiveness. And when the family is ready, they would lift the cover off. And that could be a matter of hours or days or weeks. And so to start the ceremony today with that was very touching and befitting of the last 50 years. Yeah.
One thing I now realize is for myself personally, the finish line always shifts, and it's never like you just feel as long as you feel content. As long as I feel content, that's a win. In the past, there's been so many projects I made, and that's going to be amazing, and I get there, and you realize that when you get to the finish line, it's actually just the start line of the next thing. And you get to that thing, and you make it out to be, and then you post about it, and it's this greatest thing ever, and it's such a career highlight. This looks really good on the portfolio. And when you get there and you tick that box, you realize, okay, you're already thinking about the next thing. It's just the inherent nature of us in this space. So I really just view this as myself using sound to serve, and as long as I serve in a way that my parents will be proud of me, then on to the next mission. I know that a lot of people out there have divided views on this event, and what the apology represents and what it, all this type of thing. For me, I take a step back and I look at it and I'm like, what's this apology for? Okay, so 2/3 of the people that were overstaying were, European in origin, and yet 2/3 of the people that were targeted were brown people. That's factually, that's racist. So, what do I want people to learn from this is accept that, what's done is done, and let's do away with racism and the way that the law is applied. Because, I'm of the thought that, the dawn raids were not necessarily illegal. In terms of, if you've got people overstaying, irrespective of skin colour, you're overstaying, you're breaking the law. I'm Samoan. If we were in Samoa and there were all these other nationalities that were, taking resources because they had overstayed their welcome, of course it would be in Samoa's best interest to, make it more fair and equitable for the tax-paying citizens. So I get all of that. So to me, the apology isn't necessarily the fact that there were dawn raids. From what I understand, dawn raids have continued to this day. There's been 61 over the past year. Because technically people are breaking the law, and it's in the interest of the government to get these people out to, make those resources available for the tax-paying citizens. So, but the way in which that law was applied was inherently racist. And I've been in the industry and creative industries enough to know that a lot of laws and stuff are applied in a way that benefits a certain group of people with resourcing that it doesn't, that's not afforded to others. And so, there's a game being played here. There's a way that the system is being played to the advantage of some and to the disadvantage of others, and that needs to change, in my opinion. So I hope that this event becomes a bit of a template, a bit of an acknowledgement for other nations or other institutions to realize, hey, are we governing this in the best way possible? Are we doing everything that is fair and equitable for all that it affects?
Today, I stand on behalf of the New Zealand Government to offer a formal and unreserved apology to Pacific communities for the discriminatory implementation of the immigration laws of the 1970s that led to the events of the dawn raids. The government expresses its sorrow, remorse and regret that the dawn raids and random police checks occurred and that these actions were ever considered appropriate. Our government conveys to the future generations of Aotearoa that the past actions of the Crown were wrong and that the treatment of your ancestors was wrong. We convey to you our deepest and sincerest apology. We also apologise for the impact these events have had on other peoples, such as Māori and other ethnic communities who are unfairly targeted and impacted by the random police checks of the time. We acknowledge the distress and hurt that these experiences would have caused.
I really commend Jacinda for taking this project on. You know, I like I said, I've grown up in one area of society, completely different life, like background, and then went to, a school like Auckland Grammar, and I've come through classical music circles, done a lot of projects with that side of the
trained in it.
yeah, and so I understand the differences and a lot of the inherent biases, about how one side views the other. And I maintain a current Herald premium subscription, so I can read the comments of what a lot of middle New Zealand thinks
so you can
about
keep
these.
An eye on the eye guy.
Yeah. And it's not that I'm on one side or the other. I would like to think that I want to be a contributing member of society as a human, as an artist, and all these types of things. And in a democratic society, I always have to remind myself, democracy relies upon an informed population. I'm very informed on my Pacific culture, heritage, lived experience, all of that. I'm very informed, lived culture experience of, European, white New Zealand. And this event is when white New Zealand is coming to grasps with an incident with the brown New Zealand. And so sound is a very powerful way to bring upon the healing that we're wanting to see in this conversation. To a lot of other cultures, sound is sound. It's just something you hear, in our indigeneity, in indigenous circles, the Māoris use the porotiti string instrument whirring over the tummy chest of a sick baby because those bass frequencies dislodge the mucus that can help the baby recover. Hokulea, when I was recording the Hokulea from Hawaii, arriving on Ngāti Orake shores, recording that. They before they step into the water, they do a chant, forgotten the name of it, but that frequency and the way they vibrato is not designed, but it's been passed down as unlocks the space, it unlocks the frequencies to allow the ancestors to guide them onto shore. And so the way we view sound is very, very different. It serves much more than just this aesthetic value of what we hear, but it's about really the feeling, the way the Māoris kapahaka and stomp to wake up their ancestors underneath their feet, to bring them into their performance so that they can manifest it into an analog performance. It's just fascinating to me, the way our Indigenous people use sound. And so for me, it's a privilege to be asked and commissioned on this project to be able to use the conduit of sound to bring upon the healing between these two parties.
That was Faiumu Matthew Salapu, or Anonymouz, talking about his soundscape intention that accompanied the Ifoga, the ceremonial seeking of forgiveness in the Samoan custom, and historic apology by the New Zealand government for the dawn raids of the 1970s. We also heard Hufanga he Akomoe Lotu, Dr. Okusitino Mahina, who contributed to the soundscape, as well as the Prime Minister of Aotearoa, New Zealand, Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern. This podcast was presented for Sounds Centre for New Zealand Music, Toi Te Arapuoro by me, Tauiriili Alpha Maiava. The producer is Roger Smith, sound engineer Phil Brownlee, production assistant is Nina Lesperanze, and executive producer Diana Marsh. Thanks to Radio New Zealand for their audio from the apology ceremony, and thank you for listening. For more about this podcast series, Moments in Time, including extended interviews from our contributors in this episode and other Sounds podcasts, or information about the music of Aotearoa New Zealand, go to the Sounds website, sounds.org.nz. That's SOUNZ. Whawhetai te le lava. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Toi te arapuoru, Sounds.